We're going to attempt to give some advice from a post on Reddit in the line cook community. We're also going to talk about so much other news. We're back. It's the Repertoire podcast. My name is Justin Khanna. I'm here with Ray DeLucci. How are you today, Ray?
Doing good. How are you?
Yeah, doing good. I have a couple of housekeeping things right at the top of the episode, and I just kind of want to outline for the listener our process on some of this stuff going forward. We are publishing way more news content than we ever have before in the history, both of this channel and me doing podcast solo. And Ray, I know you've been doing a ton of work behind the scenes with clips and things. And so there's two errors that I want to call out, and I mostly want to discuss how we will be updating them so you can kind of, as a listener, get a sense of how previous episodes are going to be updated. Because I think Ray and I have a very high integrity standard, and we want to make sure that we're not contributing to any sort of misinformation or, in the age of AI, doing all of the source checking stuff. I just want to make sure that we're being transparent and open with some of this stuff. So the first one is on the Jacob Bickelhaupt story. And so it was brought to our attention that I was actually mispronouncing or misnaming the first wife of Jacob in the story as we were outlining it. So I was saying Jennifer the whole time. It's actually Alexa, and that was brought to our attention via a couple of comments, and then we just backed it up in some research. And so that's an error on my part. That was, I think, just a cross in the names as how we were getting information put together for the show. And so that was error number one. Mostly a naming issue. Secondly, thankfully, in the story that we covered on the $100,000 a year chef salary information, Chef's Pencil, the original source that I was covering the article from, they reached out and they were like, hey, this is where we were getting the information from. And so that was both helpful and not helpful. And so I'll just give a little bit of context, not to spend too much time on it, because I do want to get into the stories that we're going to cover today. And so I was extrapolating that they were giving data for 2025. I don't know, Ray, if you were taking the same information there, and I referenced that in the episode. The information I can find is from 2024, where we're not quite cracking that $100,000 a year threshold. And so thankfully, again, Chef's Pencil reached out and they said, we took the data from each individual metro area, and then they ran it through what they're calling like their own statistical model, where they can take some of the information from and base, not cherry pick, but actually take data which was present, which you really have to comb through it and find it, but thankfully they provided me the instructions to how to go into the BLS website and get that information. And so their numbers were correct. I don't want to make it seem that I was like calling out their data. I know I used, unfortunately, the phrase they're making up numbers, and that was just because I wanted to see the numbers directly. I'm not going to quote things to you folks that I can't exactly see, especially from a governmental source where they're getting some of this information from. And so that's what we'll address these at the top of the episode so that we're not burying it later in the episode, so that you folks can be made aware, especially if you're a serial listener of the show. And then also what Ray is going to go ahead and do is provide an update in the show note of that episode, where we're either going to link to a source or we're going to put something either in that show note that says, there's been a correction, we have made an update, we were made aware of new information, and that's going to make it so that as you explore the back catalog, even if you're going to binge stuff, we're going to make sure that we're trying to stay as accurate as possible. And so anything else, Ray, on the just like updates and as we're moving so quickly, how you want to make sure that people know about changes?
No, I think we're in a good position, and I think we're good to go. So,
okay, so you actually have the first story today, and so what did you find on Reddit, and why was it interesting?
yeah, so there's two Reddit communities that I like to follow. It's r-line cooks and r-kitchen confidential. This post actually made it into both, but I thought it would be good to go over this because it's advice for a chef or a cook that you don't get to see a lot of times. And I think it was a very unique situation. I've shared with Justin that moving forward, I've been looking on these Reddit threads, and there's actually been a lot recently. A lot's going on in the industry. And I feel like if we're going to provide value, we should offer advice on this stuff. So if this is something you're interested, please let us know. But basically how the thread goes is the poster's name is Melodic Durian 3425. And the title is, hello, young line cook here. Could use some advice on a situation. Thanks. And the question is, how do I handle a situation where I'm asked to train someone, but he resists correction and others intervene? How do you assert authority without being the bad guy in kitchens like this? So the long story for them is, I've been here for a monthish now, so I'm new, and we have an even newer guy who I'm responsible to train. Chefs kept correcting me in front of him because I still have a lot to learn and improve on. But this obviously hurts my credibility in front of him. And as I already predicted, the moment I corrected him on his plating, he snapped back and kept whining like a kid, because apparently someone else told him a way that wasn't like my way, so I'm wrong apparently. I stopped training him, kept my head down, and continued to set up like I'm running it solo. Then I got called out for not correcting him on how things are supposed to be done. Then I kept getting talked over, and everyone kept intervening when I tried to train him, and it's quite exhausting. Goes on to say that he, didn't want to look like weak in front of them. Says the guy has a kitchen experience but extremely unaware, doesn't pay attention, gets defensive. So all that to say is we have a situation where a chef has promoted a cook to a more of a managerial role or to have a subordinate, and they also have a subordinate in that situation. It seems like the cook does not have a lot of managerial experience, is still learning on the fly. Um, and wanted your advice. I definitely have my thoughts, but Justin, give your advice first on this.
People shy away from these situations. I actually love these situations because it is the genuine like clashing of ideas, how things play out in the real world. We can talk in theory all day long, but when you're in a situation like this person's talking about, you have to get set up for service tonight. And there's personalities clashing, there's egos clashing, there's all these like, what's the standard? There's subordinates and people above you and all of the tangling that happens in some of these environments. And so I want to take a step back and mostly acknowledge some of the patterns that I'm seeing, and then maybe just talk about some solutions that, can drive some of this forward in a way that maybe this turns into something, as you shared, like that this could be a recurring segment of the show. And so if this gets people psyched for us to go into these subreddits and maybe have a conversation on the show, maybe we can make it a subsection of the show. So the first one is the person is clearly not skilled enough in the managerial side of things. And I use that word intentionally because you can get better at the management side of things. And what I fear in this person's reaction to, I tried to manage, I tried to train, I tried to teach, and it didn't go well. And so what I'm going to do, he literally uses the language, I stopped training him and kept my head down and then continued to set up like I'm running it solo. That is one of the like gravest mistakes you can make in a situation like this. Yes, it's going to be unfortunate if you need to kind of like take the reins and actually push forward just to get set up for service today. But labeling, managing, labeling, training, labeling, teaching is inherently bad because you failed it at the first time, is not the way you would approach anything else in your career. You can't get brunoise the first time. Your hollandaise gets broken. Your chicken stock's a little cloudy the first time you end up making it. What are you going to tell yourself? I'm going to come in tomorrow and I'm going to do a little bit better tomorrow. And for whatever reason, some of these interpersonal skills, we don't approach them in the same mindset. And that can not feel so good when you are the person who are looked to as you're the expert. You need to come in and you need to teach this new person, especially as, again, trying to pick up on some nuance here. This person has experience, but they obviously have some gaps here. And so to not, again, make this the entire episode, I talk about two specific pillars of total station domination in the program. And shameless plug, because I think it's totally applies here. These are people running stations. There's feedback, which is kind of your mental response, how you respond to the way that people are giving. How I define feedback in the program is literally information as a basis for improvement. And so that's something you can genuinely get better at. And then the second one is results. And so there's clearly a misalignment of not being able to identify the clear qualities that we're going for in this kitchen. And so that is also something that you need to take to your manager, and you need to have that conversation like with everybody involved. It should, in my opinion, it should not be this like he said, she said, I'm going to go to the person and try to get information to try to twist it so that I'm correct. It should genuinely be we are all in the same team pushing this boulder forward together, as opposed to I'm going to try to appear like the quote unquote right person in this scenario. I don't know. What were your takeaways, Ray, when you read this?
I mean, I feel like the blame first of all lands at the feet of the chef, giving him the direction. You don't set someone up for success by both training them on the spot and having them train someone else if they're not comfortable. Like for this person, they're obviously newer to the kitchen space. It is, I think, quite an unfair ask to say, hey, you're going to start training someone and I haven't even trained you properly. And restaurants have this problem where they don't have great onboarding. A lot of times it's like get thrown on a station, get thrown through prep. And this is why like total station domination is really good. Because if you don't have proper onboarding, then like you're trying to figure it out. And like there's data that shows it takes months at a time to get really proficient at the job when you start a new one. And so I think that's just a gap in leadership. I also think that like there is some validity to the idea that if the person, like if I was in a spot and the person above me didn't really know what they were doing either, like it's going to be hard for me to come to them as someone like needing direction, needing guidance if the person above me has no idea what they're doing too. So I think also that's an issue. The biggest thing I would say in this situation is this cook should go to their chef and just lay it out. Hey, you haven't given me the proper training to succeed at this. You also haven't given me the proper training to train this individual. And I don't think it's as much as like people undermining. Well, know that that seems to be the clear directive they've taken. I think the bigger issue is they've not been set up properly. So I don't think you should approach this issue as I'm being undermined. You kind of are, but it's more so you have not been set up to lead properly. And that failure in training and leadership and teaching is what is causing the harder job for this person. So I would just say that I think that is crucial, is that this chef needs to be a better leader. And I don't know if this leads to this being a toxic kitchen or a kitchen that's not ran well, but if you share that feedback and you're not getting results, then maybe somewhere else is needed. Because at the end of the day, there's good leadership systems, there's bad leadership systems, and oftentimes in kitchens, it's hard to like turn them around right away. And so if you imagine as you grow your career here, like the same stuff will happen. So just some thoughts.
I get so upset when people use that anecdote of like, oh, you only become a chef when you're running a team. And that's why I talk about that framework I have, which is you go from cook to chef to entrepreneur, because sure, we can agree that there's like a level of responsibility that applies, but you get tested in individual moments like this
Yeah.
and multiple times throughout your career. And so you can't say that like, oh, I'm going to hold out on the teaching thing and the mentoring thing and the training thing until I become chef de cuisine, because this is just a total example of that's going to be asked of you sooner than you think. And so your ability to step into that and say, I am going to behave like a chef in this situation, I just think it totally puts you in the mindset to genuinely improve on this instead of throwing your hands up and saying, this isn't for me. And so, as a benefit for this person and anybody listening who this resonates with, and if any of these insights would benefit you in the job that you're doing on a day-to-day basis, I'm going to create in service of the person, I'm going to create a code called Durian. So Durian. We'll put it in the show notes, Ray, and it'll be for a discount on Total Station Nomination just as a promo for this episode. Even if this totally flops and people don't enjoy this segment, I just want to extend a little bit of a benefit to people listening where the program would be helpful. And so that'll be linked in the show notes if you want to take advantage. Any other thoughts on this story, Ray?
No, I think they're all good.
So I have a through line of the stories that I brought today. And I was going to call it something like the future is here. It's not already evenly distributed, something like that. But I actually paused and said, it's doing it different. So it is people who bucked the status quo, people who look at the stereotypical advice that would be espoused on owning a restaurant, being a chef in the particular context that they happen to be in. I'm going to talk about Michelin star restaurants. I'm going to talk about senior living facilities. We're going to go across the whole gamut on what I brought today. And so the first one is actually an old story, but it was republished from CNN Travel. And weirdly, I hadn't heard of it before. And so, Ray, I don't know if you had encountered this either, but it's from a restaurant in Japan called Suga Labo. And that's what I want to cover today. The title of the article is A Private Phone Number, Secret Opening Times, and No Interest in Michelin Inside One of Tokyo's Invite-Only Restaurants. And so the chef is named Yosuke Suga. And again, this restaurant has been open since 2015. And so it's not new. And I don't know what prompted them to republish this. There hasn't really been that much other news surrounding this when I decided to like search and see what other news might have prompted them to do this. But I think what's so interesting about it is both in the title, but the way that they've decided to structure the business overall. And so I'm going to read a couple of quotes here. Quote, "The restaurant's table policy is a watered down take on the no first time customers without introduction policy, which is like an old practice of some of Japan's most lauded and by their nature secretive establishments." End quote. And anybody who's tried to, like, you're following a chef on Instagram, you see they're going to eat at a restaurant and you're saying, when I go to Japan, I'm going to go to that place too. Only to find out that there's no reservation page. You go on, any sort of website and it's just, the story of the restaurant. And you're like, how in the world do I get into this place? How do I experience this restaurant? How do I go have this dining experience? Only to find out that it is exactly what this article is talking about. Quote, "The restaurants are patronized almost entirely by regulars who may be permitted to bring a guest, but there is no guarantee that the guest will be allowed to return." end quote. And so to tie it into exactly what Sugalabo does, quote, at Sugalabo, diners must be invited or recommended by existing patrons. There is no online booking system, no set opening times, only a private phone number known to the chosen few who return time and time again to the 20 cover bar and dining table, end quote. And so in my research, I was able to kind of use this policy as one of the reasons why Sugalabo is not recommended in the Michelin Guide in any way, shape, or form. And what the article talks about is the fact that the chef worked for Joel Robuchon. He was like, that's the star-studded part of my career. And I got that itch scratched, so to speak, during that time. I am not interested in stars anymore. I am only interested in taking care of the patrons that, again, continue to be regulars to my restaurant. And that's what I'm excited about. So tying into my theme, it's just doing it differently. Everybody else might say, oh, but you could have so many more reservations. You could have the stars. You could have the accolades. But it's like, that's not actually what I want in my business. And so I really want to applaud that continuously as we go through this set of stories. Another couple quotes. Quote, every month, the restaurant closes for 3 days for staff to travel around the country, meeting and networking with suppliers. I believe that when producers know who is going to be using their product, they'll send us the best that they have. And that's a quote from the chef. And I didn't do it with this amount of regularity, but when I lived on the west coast of Norway at Leesforket, we would do this. We would go to suppliers, usually through the lens of we would have a guest chef dinner, and we would take that guest chef to the dairy farm, to the fisherman, to the oyster scallop supplier. And that was all really, really beneficial from a relationships perspective, because it almost creates this unfair advantage for you in the market. It's kind of, this is like a weird side anecdote, but my son is really into the movie Ratatouille right now. He's in a big Pixar phase. And there's a scene in that movie, which I think is so funny, where the sous chef Colette, who's training Linguini, is talking about how you get the best product. And she literally talks about like bribing the delivery truck drivers, because it is this like, again, unfair advantage that you can use to get some of the best product into your restaurant, which will lead to better outcomes when you're serving guests. And so one other quick difference, or maybe just data point, quote, despite its exclusiveness, the cost of dining for the standard of food is not excessive, with the menu priced at approximately $500, with wine pairings and service fees costing extra. And so those data points, not being open and a predictable schedule, not having a reservation system, and even we are only going to be taking care of people who we have taken care of before. The piece talks about the chef's view on this perspective philosophy, in that if you're going to be part of this dining public who is just like constantly jet setting, it is a one and done experience when you go to eat at a restaurant, that's actually doing a disservice to us. Because he talks about this idea of like, if we know you're a lawyer, if we know you're in finance, if we know you have this particular interest, whether it's on the wine side or your palate leans in a particular direction, we can tailor the food to make that experience better for you. And if we have never met you before, it's almost like this, we're on the back foot and we can't actually do the thing that we are best positioned to do. This isn't going to work for every single restaurant. But again, I think that's taking context into consideration and saying, everybody else might be saying, I need to do this. I'm going to buck that and I'm going to do the thing that I'm most excited about. And so hearing this, Ray, I don't know if you had any thoughts on this way of structuring a business.
I think it's interesting how they've structured it, just simply on the fact that, looking at it as from a chef, like obviously there's like exclusivity, there's invites, and like that you can build a business off that. I wonder, like, if you are beholden to a client base that is inviting each other, knows each other, could have some similar tastes, what's the risk of innovating? Is it better because, is it like less because the people trust you, or is it higher because people have been coming to you and are invited, and therefore like you can't innovate as much? So I have that question. I mean, obviously they've been successful with this model. And you mentioned, where did you say this was again? This was,
It was on CNN Travel.
where is the restaurant located? Is in
Oh, it's in Japan,
right?
It's in, yeah.
I
it's
just
in
wonder
Japan.
if this type of model would work in an American market. Yeah, I think the closest I would think of is that NFT restaurant by Gary Vee, where it's like you have to have the NFT. Like I like, for me personally, like it would be it would be a little weird to like just be invite only. Like I'd be like, I want to go there, but if I couldn't get an invite, I'd also be like, well, I guess I don't need to go there if I'm not cool enough to be entered in. So it's just an interesting way of looking at it. But at the same time, I do think there is something to be said for exclusivity, the ability to generate want, and the need for it. And it is a new way of getting people to be really involved. I think you see this sometimes where you'll get an email. It's like sign up for the newsletter for a restaurant to get first look at like new dishes and whatnot. And that's all good marketing. This takes that to the next level where it's like, no, you need to be a part of our community in order to dine here. So it's an interesting restaurant concept.
Well, so how, I guess the other thing that came up for me is what happens if some of those regulars fizzle out?
Hmm.
And so it is an interesting idea that maybe you do take away, you don't exactly go exactly to this extreme and you say, I'm only going to be invite only for my restaurant. But how often do people look to marketing opportunities as I'm going to go to try to interact with this cold audience? Whereas maybe there's an opportunity I can imagine if Sugalabo needed new guests, they would just extend that to the people who are already dining there. And they would say, hey, instead of just being able to bring one friend, we're trying to get more people into the ecosystem here. You have the ability, if you have somebody who's a good fit, to extend this invitation to them, have them come with you to your next experience. And if they end up being a good fit, we will add them to the list, quote unquote. I feel like people forget sometimes that like their existing customer base is often that best source of new people coming, new butts in seats, so to
Hmm.
speak. And so is there you maybe have a more productive takeaway for you and your business depending on how you run things. So that's all I had. What do you got?
So this story came up actually today. It's a little bit of a quicker one, and I wanted to just cover it. So Uber announced today. This is coming from Food Dive. It Uber invests in Flytracks to scale drone delivery. So it feels like the future is here, Justin.
Yep.
The partnership is part of Uber's strategy to create a delivery network that deploys sidewalk robots and aerial drones alongside drivers and couriers. If you were a listener for last week's show, on the solo show I covered the Tesla diner and how I believe that is a training ground for autonomous robots. Very interesting to see that more automation has been introduced into the food world. So basically, a dive insight. This investment in Flytracks will help Flytracks accelerate development and deployment of drone delivery. It has completed already over 200,000 meal deliveries over the past 3 years. It currently operates in a limited number of markets in the U.S., including parts of North Carolina and Texas. It's been expanding its partnerships with aggregators like DoorDash. Quote, partnering with Uber, pioneers of ground-based mobility, brings together proven logistics expertise with aerial innovation. Quote, together we're building the infrastructure for a future where autonomous systems seamlessly move goods through our communities. So, all that to say, this is a very interesting advancement in the future. I think two really big things have come out this like the last 2 weeks. Like, I don't know if you saw the new AirPods apparently can translate in real time. And as anyone knows, especially in a bigger city, like kitchens are a melting pot of different people. And like my first mind was like, if you have AirPods that can translate into different languages, like a lot of languages are spoken in kitchens, like that actually could be very, very useful. But number two is this drone delivery system. It's like the future's here. Like I just can only imagine. And then I also wonder, like, oh, like how many dropped Uber Eats bags are we gonna be seeing on the ground? They like get these up and running. It's gonna be very interesting. But your thoughts, Justin, on what seemingly felt like far away happening in real time now?
I'm always stoked to see it. I need to experience it. Like I think we're gonna have exactly what you're saying. These very awkward, slip up moments. Again, not to totally turn this into a tech podcast episode, but did you see the Meta glasses demo that happened
I did
yesterday?
not.
Apparently, they tried to demo it live, and things just like were not working. I did not exactly view the full video, but it is this example of we're gonna have these growing pains. There's gonna be these mistakes, and what I like is the fact that people are a little bit less fearful of those mistakes. They're much more apt to just accept that those are the consequences of innovation. And we're gonna have exactly what you're saying. I just picture that image of the splattered Chipotle bowl burrito on the sidewalk, and the drone just like flying around trying to search for it.
Yeah.
But I also understand when you're sitting in the delivery app and you are you get your order built and you're looking at the final cost of the situation. Here in Seattle, the mandate from the local government is $28 an hour minimum for people doing delivery work. And so what that translates to is frankly, a doubling for my wife and I if we're going to deliver from any sort of the platforms, Instacart, DoorDash, Uber Eats. And so what I was struck by in scrolling my feed last week was two side-by-side situations of, I think it was Uber and a Tesla robo-taxi. The Uber was, $40 and the Tesla taxi was $8. And so that massive cost reduction because you're not having to pay a human in this situation is a double-edged sword in all of these scenarios, right? Because there's no cost, quote unquote. The cost is going to marginally decrease to zero for flying drones around, and you're putting that up against paying a human to drive a car for $28 an hour. And so that's the real thing that we're going to have to grapple with as some of these technology improvements and innovations come online. And it's not to say that everything is going to get totally stripped all the way back down to zero, but it is a situation where the share of the pie is going to start to change. And so, again, there's real ramifications that we're going to experience, and it is something that this is not in beta. This is not in a, you know what I mean? Like, this is actually launching in a market.
Yep.
And that, I think, is something that we're going to continue to keep an eye on, because I was a person where, like, when I was living in California, Uber launched in San Francisco and it came up to Napa. And so I found myself driving for Uber as a side gig because I wanted to make additional money. And so I empathize with all of these situations. And it's like, if you're the person who you rely on DoorDash either as a side hustle or if it's your main thing, you drive for multiple companies, you have to take a look at that and just acknowledge that that is on the horizon. And I'm not trying to fearmonger, but it is like, that's why we continue to cover these, so that you have an extended runway from a time perspective to at least make a decision on what it is that you're going to do for yourself professionally. So I don't know.
Yeah, the one last thing I'll say is, like, I read an article, I think it was the New York Times, where it was like it was just basically stressed like how big of a deal translation in the AirPods 3 was. Like, this is like humanity changing technology if it works. And I'm just like, yeah, we're just so used to like it's I still think, because I mean, I'm 28, I grew up in an era where like we just came into all this, but I still remember the world kind of without all this technology. And it's just like, yeah, like, we're gonna have flying drones and we're gonna have translatable AirPods and like all this different stuff and all this different tech. And you see the proliferation of technology now, the good and then the very, very ugly. And it's just like, God. So hey, maybe next time you all, maybe in a year you all are getting your Chipotle delivered from the drones. I also can see people trying to take these drones down like to get food. Like, there's gonna be so many crazy stories. But that was my story on Uber Eats.
Well, just really one more quick thing, again, not to pile on and add more. It feels like we could do an entire episode on just the technological improvements, but like video auto dubbing as another example of that translation being beneficial for knowledge transference. I remember having to do transcription translations with another chef friend of mine because I was making a training video for a client's concept, and they were like, we need to have this in Spanish. And so that very manual process, it's literally being offered to us on YouTube right now, on both the channels, on my channel and then on the Repertoire channel, saying, hey, do you want to have your videos just automatically dubbed so that regardless of the language that the person wants to listen to it in, we have these popular languages that we can just automatically make your voice sound like you're speaking Spanish, sound like you're speaking Hindi, sound like you're speaking French. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And so that is another just massive benefit that I think people need to be aware of in this, like, well, and again, I use this in the context of I don't want to create training videos because my staff only speaks, majority one language, and I don't speak that language. It's like the tools are getting good enough where you have that opportunity, and that could really make a substantial change in your business. And so I get excited about those sorts of things.
Nice. That's all I got.
Cool. So, yeah, so I have a question. If you have a restaurant concept and it's successful, you open this business and it's profitable, there's a line out the door, what are your friends and family, your other coworkers, other business owners in your world, what are they going to tell you, Ray? What advice are you likely to hear?
Open another one.
So that is exactly. I thought the same exact thing. I've shared threads on this before. And the subject of this story is Franklin BBQ in Austin, Texas. And so this is so funny, the timing of it, because the owner went on a podcast in August, and the owner said, quote, to the question, would you open another one? The owner said, quote, oh, we could. It sure would be a bummer, though, Franklin said on the podcast. I mean, it would never be as good. It would make the one we have not nearly as good. It would kill the magic, end quote. Fast forward to, now we're in September, almost towards the end of September. News just broke that Franklin BBQ will open a separate location, but it's going to be an event space. And so, quote, the event space will be at 2027 Anchor Lane in Austin, about 3 miles northeast of the original smokehouse. And, quote, the event space will strictly be used for just that, events. Weddings, parties, other functions will be held there, and future plans include making it a public space, tailgate parties, and such. KXAN reported that Franklin still hasn't named the space, which could be in operation by late 2025. So we're like close. Like it could be happening in the next couple months. The second location for this famed business that, again, has like just consistent lines, consistent popularity. Even when we're talking about like traveling across the country and going to like a food conference, like food event space where you have all the tents and, people may just do one dish on a little bamboo plate. Franklin BBQ, like I remember an event I went to in Portland several years ago, and it was like the outstanding favorite of that show was Franklin BBQ. And so I say this because of what I brought up as the hook to the show, to the story, is everybody's going to tell you to zig and you can zag. You have the opportunity to, because you are closer to your business than anybody else, they might be giving you this advice because it's like self-serving for them. It's like, oh, I hate that I have to drive 45 minutes to go to your business. Why don't you open one in this neighborhood? Not understanding that there's going to be so many negative implications for you if you're all able to acknowledge the fact that the scale is wrong, the team that I would have to expand is wrong, the infrastructure required doesn't exactly jam with all of this stuff. Franklin BBQ knows what's best for their own business. And so the way that they're doing this, we don't know if it's going to be successful. I could totally eat my words in a year, and then it could be like the Franklin BBQ event space closed down. And then we can maybe do a postmortem if that ends up happening. But my gut, as a person who I ran an event production company, they are so much more profitable. The scale is so much more like when you can predict that 270 people are going to come to this thing. Oh my goodness. Like the way that you can dial things in and staff better and your inventory is a little bit tighter and all of the things from a profitability perspective are just so much better than a standalone restaurant. It's like, this is going to help everybody across the board. Because if you have a really, really large party that you want to bring to Franklin BBQ, how much does that contribute to the actual original restaurant feeling overwhelmed? Mm-hmm. And so I think all of this insight, wanting to keep the magic in the original location, like that I think is like founder mode in action. It's this person saying, I know what makes this special. There's a level of taste here that I think we're seeing exemplified. And I just want to call it out in the through line of all these stories that I'm covering, which is just doing it different. I don't know if you had thoughts hearing this.
No, I think this is going to be really good. I think that when you look at margins, restaurants are very small, very like low. Events yield a lot more opportunity. And so I think that in the vein of doing it different, or the spirit of doing it different, this idea that, okay, what are we expanding for? If the expansion is for margins, I think then a lot of people like get it wrong. Like unless you're like a franchise, like coffee shop or something, like if you have a successful brand, leverage that into a different business model or different business type. So instead of Franklin, wanting to just make another restaurant, make, another, like you'll get the same profit margin. I feel like they made this business decision where it's like twofold. Franklin BBQ is a destination. People travel to go eat there. So if you are going there to travel and eat, and then the second one pops up, it kind of takes away the specialness of it. So if you open an event space, you're not only getting a better margin business, but you keep and protect the niche and almost like special reality of what Franklin BBQ is known for. So I actually think it's a really smart play, and I think more restaurants should leverage this idea of like, hey, we have a great brand, let's do different things with it and not just open another spot. Not saying you shouldn't ever open another spot, but just something to consider.
Yeah, put the context into perspective. And if for a lot of businesses, opening a second location is an absolute no-brainer. But in the spirit of trying to add some nuance to the conversation, I want to give these examples when I see them being done, in my opinion, properly, correctly, ideally with a proper, a very well constructed forward-looking forecast. I think this is just going to be a no-brainer money printer for them. And I think it's going to do awesome. What do you got?
All right, so my story actually comes from Bloomberg. And I have been hammering the GLP-1 smaller portion idea for a while. Getting some pushback from some people. The data's there. You need to know about this. But let's not talk about smaller portions in the essence of GLP-1, but just in the essence of affordability. And so Olive Garden is announcing that they are testing smaller portions as diners seek cheaper options. And this is going to go into a story later on about menu pricing for the National Restaurant Association. But I found this very informative. Quote, Darden Restaurant Inc. rolled out smaller portion, lower priced entrees at select Olive Garden locations during the quarter. The shift reflects broader changes in dining habits. Millions of Americans are now taking weight loss drugs that control appetites, and consumers more broadly are cutting back on dining out to save money. So with consumers, taking these weight loss drugs, they're wanting smaller portions because they physically can't eat it. So if you put yourself in the shoes of these people taking the drugs, if you go to a restaurant and you can only eat half of a portion, why would you spend $36 on an entree when it really should be $18 for the price you can actually eat? And if you've ever gone to Olive Garden, you know the prices are pretty well known, and they built their brand off of large volumes of food. Maybe not entrees, but all you can eat soup and breadsticks. Mainstay of my childhood, mainstay of my high school years, even a mainstay now. Not gonna lie, love me some zuppa toscana from Olive Garden. But quote, against this backdrop, the initiative is designed to offer guests more variety at approachable price points. A survey by point of sale technology firm Lightspeed Commerce published in August found that 44% of U.S. adults are ordering from kids' menus, citing lower prices, smaller portions, and simpler options. The test launch during the quarter features 7 entrees and lighter portions, available at dinner and throughout the weekend. These meals are served with Olive Garden's unlimited breadsticks, there you go, and super salad, and are currently offered at about 40% of restaurants. Early results have been encouraging. This all comes when the Darden Group has their stock is not doing well. They're trying to recoup and recover against losses. But again, GLP-1 is affecting diners. Money, like the amount of money people can spend at restaurants, is being affected as well. Not adapting to this is going to hurt you. So just interesting to see like a group like Olive Garden having to. This isn't like, oh, they work their menu for GLP-1. It's like we are seeing customers not dine with us as much. We're ordering these lesser options. How do we still capture value from them even though they're trying to spend less? Your thoughts, Justin?
I have shared with you offline, Ray, that I just think you're early with like the reason you're getting some pushback on this, I think,
Mhm.
is because you're so early on reporting some of this stuff. And yeah, again, could be totally wrong. We'll see how this pans out. I don't think GLP-1s are going to go away anytime soon. I also have shared with you that I don't know if restaurants are the people who are going to need to make the changes, but maybe it's grocery. And that I think is an interesting insight is if you're going to go on to one of these therapies for 6 months to a year, are you just also in that lifestyle change thinking to yourself, restaurants are off the table, no pun intended? Maybe, maybe not. And so making all of these changes for a customer population who might not be coming to see you because of this change that they're on, I don't know, maybe it's just something to consider. Also, I think it's so fascinating to see these big players and how they think about perceived value from the customers that they're serving. We talked about the McDonald's dollar menu being quote unquote back, but it was in line with you need to buy a full priced item and then you get access to buying something else for $1. Same thing with, again, you're going to get these smaller portions. The cost is going to come down, but then we're also going to make sure you leave full in the sense of unlimited breadsticks to go along with your meal.
Yeah.
I also grew up in the Midwest where the Italian restaurants almost made a name off of serving you these gargantuan portions. And it was seen as this huge like benefit of, yeah. And this was like back in the early 2000s. It was like, I'll totally spend $25 for a plate of pasta because I'm going to literally get enough for me to eat dinner now. And then I'm going to get another full size portion that I can take home and have for dinner again tomorrow.
Yeah.
And for those that don't know, Olive Garden actually experimented with this where they would give you your normal plate. And then instead of giving you a gargantuan bowl of food in front of you, they would give you the option to add a drastically discounted, pre-prepared and packaged in a to-go container portion of pasta to take home for you the next day.
Mhm.
And it was something like a no-brainer deal to add on because, again, you're already dining out and paying quote-unquote retail price to sit in the seat and get this served to you hot in a bowl from a server. But to get it packaged up, it's like that was getting into, meal prep category territory when it comes to the financials. And so again, I'm interested to see where this goes. The kids menu statistic is fascinating. 44%, I think you said,
Yeah.
of people are ordering off the kids menu. There's certainly adults that, love themselves some chicken tenders. And again, as I'm moving into a stage in life where I'm starting to think about ordering off the kids menu for my own kids, it is an interesting insight to see that is the reason that they cited as why they're doing it
Mhm.
is because it's predictability and lower portions and lower portion sizes.
Yep.
Because yeah, if you're worried about like if you've ever done any of the research on what the nutritional information is on an entree at Olive Garden, it's
It's not
crazy. Like
favorable.
yeah, way past 1,000 calories. And so if you're tracking these things, if you're a MyFitnessPal and my phone type of person, it's like those are starting to be things that you're considering. And if, as have talked about in previous shows, if I now have the option to have a better experience in going to the place that what one person in the friend group or one person in the family is suggesting, I'm much more likely to give a thumbs up to that in the group chat. And then it's like, that's more butts and seats that the business is going to get. So it makes sense to me. I'm just very curious to see, how long does this last? Do other people catch on to this? Is this something that we're going to start to see proliferate further?
Yep. Agreed.
So I have two quick stories, and then I'll hand it back over to you again in this vein of doing it different. So the first one is a quick hit story from a local publication. So seniorhousingnews.com talked about this Culinary Canvas Award winner. And so this individual is recognized out of Brookdale Park Place, located in Spokane, Washington, and it's a senior living facility. And for those that have been following along with people like Dan Gusti of Brigade, talking about institutional chefs, whether it's schools or hospitals or, again, senior living facilities, this hits particularly home for me because since 2020, I've had to move my dad into two separate assisted living facilities, and my dad loves food. And so the culinary program was absolutely a consideration for us as we were deciding which facility where he would land. And so the reason that this person was awarded this is because, quote, he regularly hosts interactive cooking demonstrations, themed dining events, and marketing showcases, all of which enhance the resident experience and strengthen community engagement, end quote. And I just thought it was, again, an shining example of, I'm going to be working in an assisted living facility. There's so much work that goes into these environments. It's 3 meals a day. You're typically working on holidays. You're really having to work around dietary restrictions that, like, low salt, you know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
different, you have to overcook things from a texture perspective so that people who have bad dentation can make sure that they can eat the meals. It is like an incredibly condensed window where you're serving potentially hundreds of people over and over and over again. You're maybe not that well resourced from the staffing side. Your equipment isn't as well built out as it could be. And there's so much there that I think people look at those environments and they say, I don't want to do that, or I'm going to kind of, like, quote unquote, mail it in. And this is an example of somebody who's saying, what are the opportunities here? What is the cool stuff we can do that, again, for the facility, that is a direct increase in, oh my goodness, my grandma, my grandpa, my dad, my mom loved living at this place because it was so engaging culinarily.
Yeah.
And there's going to be so many other implications here that just directly impact the business, which is, again, residents in rooms in these businesses. And so I just thought it was really cool. My dad's assisted living facility has some level of this, which, again, I think is one of the big reasons why we decided to go there. Again, a direct business implication. But I don't know if you had thoughts on this as a story.
No, I mean, I just commend people in institutional food. I think they're overlooked, they're undervalued, but they are literally the reason why, like, people have great moments during the day. Someone who's in a facility like that, like, those meals they look forward to. I remember when my grandmother was in the hospital for extended periods of time, like, she looked forward to dinner and being able to watch that. It's a little bit of normalcy. It's a little bit of being able to be a reprieve out of where you're at now. So yeah, I've just, hats off and commend that chef and all those that work in those spaces.
So last story for me is a update on the ever-changing landscape of Michelin expanding in the US. And so we're seeing these stories come out of guides getting launched, and then they're sometimes, like, underwhelming on the first year that they get launched. Colorado is the example that I want to highlight today. And so Colorado's Michelin guide just dropped this week. And for those that haven't been following along, when Colorado's guide launched, the highest the guide went was awarding 1 Michelin star to places. As of this week, there is now a 2 Michelin starred restaurant in Colorado. It's called the Wolves Tailor. And the personal connection I have to this is I actually dined at Alchemist in the spring with a sous chef at the Wolves Tailor back when they only had 1 Michelin star. And it was just total happenstance that we ended up dining together. It was because I needed to get another person to dine with me. I was a solo diner, and Alchemist doesn't allow solo diners. It's just too involved of an experience for them to have single diners at the counter there. And so I had this amazing long tasting menu experience to get to know this guy. And Cody is his name. And I was messaging him, like, the team is just absolutely ecstatic. It is almost like this sense of disbelief is what he told me over DM in this achievement, because in a lot of respects, like Colorado was not on the map culinarily from a fine dining perspective 10 years ago.
Mm,
And now there's a 2 Michelin star restaurant in the mountain time zone. I just think it's incredible to see the way that these cities are maturing in a way that, again, I think we need to put these levels of expectations back on in a reasonable fashion when we see Michelin expanding. Because it is not going to, I don't believe it's a chicken and egg problem. Like, you can certainly give examples of cities and restaurants where they're executing at an incredibly high level, but they don't have a Michelin guide yet. But I honestly think that, like, this is how the market is going to start to respond when the Michelin guide comes, and now there's a carrot that you can dangle for a chef who's interested in pushing the boundaries. That's the payoff. That's the ultimate moment of satisfaction. Fulfillment's maybe not the word to use because sometimes these awards can feel the opposite of that. But I do think that we need to keep an eye on this, is that it's going to feel underwhelming at first, and then people are going to up their game. The Michelin guide is going to look for consistency, and then the awards are going to shortly follow. And so congratulations to everybody in Colorado, especially the team at the Wolves Taylor, for getting 2 Michelin stars. I think it's really exciting, and I'm going to certainly keep an eye on it.
awesome. Well, I have two quick stories as well. I'll say my valiant attempt to try to understand the economy through the lens of a chef, I am so bewildered. There's so many things going on in the economy, especially for restaurants, for food industry. I mean, you had a report today, like last month, the jobless claims were at a four year high. It just came out today that the jobless claims are now like lower than they've been. What is it? U.S. jobless claims fall, but labor market remains tight. U.S. Initial jobless claims drop by most in almost 4 years. Like, it's going crazy. Layoffs low, like, but there's still a lot of data, inflate, all these different things. Why do I bring this up? The Nation's Restaurant News shared this article, quote, restaurant operators plan to accelerate openings despite headwinds. And so what I found interesting in this piece, perusing over it, is that a report from Bank of America shows that U.S. restaurant spending accelerated in August, rising 3.7% year over year, up from 2.5% in July, as consumers returned both to chain and independent establishments. If you've been watching the show, I cover the National Restaurants Association's performance index, and June and July looked pretty negative. They weren't like drastic, but they weren't looking positive. I'm very, very interested to see what August looks like, because from this reporting, it seems that August saw an uptick. The uptick signals renewed momentum in the sector after several months of slower growth. Chain restaurants narrowed their declines to just 0.9% from a 2.9% drop in July, while independent eateries posted stronger growth, climbing to 5.3% from 4.3%. So, what's interesting is this point right here. So, also, recent negative trends haven't dampened optimism about unit growth. A new study conducted by Crunchtime Information Systems in partnership with Technomics shows that multi-unit restaurant operators plan to open 20% new locations throughout the next 2 years compared to the previous 2 years. This comes despite 73% of operators expressing concerns about the economy and 75% acknowledging that growth has become more challenging. So even though 75% of operators see that growth is more challenging and they're more uncertain about the economy, we're at a point now where they're trying to, they're trying to expand. So I really don't know what to make of it, except that, like, no one knows what's going on. Everything's going forward, and people are betting that in 2 years things are going to be fine. We'll see what happens, but it's just interesting to know. And the last thing I have from the National Restaurant Association was that menu prices update. They had rising grocery and menu food costs lift consumer inflation in August. They shared that consumer prices rose 0.4% in August, up from 0.2% in July. The increase was led by a 0.5% jump in food prices. Restaurant prices rose 0.3% for the second consecutive month, marking 7 straight months of solid growth. So it's interesting. Restaurant food prices are going up, obviously, like on the menu. Inputs are also going up a little bit. So just a note, like, prices are going up, but it seems like they're in tandem with the inflationary effects happening right now. But just all things to be aware of. I think if you're planning a business right now, this is such a tumultuous time. But there is data showing that customers did come back in August, and there's data showing that people are confident. So I don't really know what to make of it besides, operate as a good business, be smart, but obviously keep planning for the future.
The entrepreneurial experience is, like, inherently a risk-taking endeavor, and I think you're totally seeing the way that people are performing here. I also draw it back to, I'm not an economist, but some of the things that we're seeing both on the macro side is like the government is literally saying we're going to grow our way out of some of these problems that we're experiencing from like a fiscal deficit perspective, from a monetary policy perspective. And that's fascinating to see that restaurant, like that trickles all the way down to restaurants saying, in order to find success, like let's just go and open more locations, kind of similar to back to the standard out of the box advice that you're going to see if your business is doing well. And
Yeah.
then the other one is this like, you'll often see people talk about like this K-shaped economy where people, like the winners are winning and the losers are losing. So like you plot out from a singular point, a chart going up and to the right and then down and to the right. I think that's what I'm seeing in my feeds. Like I'm seeing friends that own restaurants saying, oh my goodness, my business is closing. People on Facebook and Instagram saying XYZ place is unfortunately having to shutter its doors. And then I'm also seeing Eater publish these pieces of like the hottest openings in San Francisco and New York and Seattle and Denver, like this quarter. You know what I mean? It is so interesting to see both ends finding like there's volatility on both sides, so to speak. And the other insight that came up as you were talking about the inflation numbers, which again is like, it's not as overwhelming as we saw in previous years. And that might be contributing to people's levels of confidence, even though it seems uncertain, is that we've kind of gone through this level of like, you see these screenshots on Twitter and Facebook sometimes, people posting like back in 2003, a Chipotle bowl or burrito was $4.75. And it's like, that is like crazy to see that, in our lifetimes,
Yeah.
we were experiencing this level of, price increases. And so now we're all kind of like accustomed to a sandwich is $17, a cocktail is $24, a entree at a restaurant where you're sitting down and it's going to be decently prepared with good quality product is like, that's going to be $47. And so now like that sticker shock has kind of like gone away.
Yeah.
And as you're talking about consumers being excited about returning, maybe that's what we're experiencing where people are saying, okay, cool, we're in this new paradigm now, fully, like both feet all the way in. I can actually forecast and plan a business plan around what these costs are going forward. And barring some sort of additional black swan event that we might experience as a society, this is actually something I can build my business around. And even though I feel uncertain, again, that's an entrepreneurial experience. You're going to still lean in anyways and try to run forward. I just think it's fascinating.
Yeah, I think also, when we cover the tariffs, there's a lot of people saying, don't be panicking. Or I hate that term, panicking. I think it's so dumb. And I think like, and we reported that restaurants had some good months. I think May was a good month. Like we've shared all these things. And so I just want to share that like, if you come to this with like a political ideology of like looking at this stuff, I think you have a lot of blind spots. But if you come to this purely as like, how are you preparing as a business? This is how you need to be looking at this stuff. It's not left or right. It's not like it's truly trying to understand what the market's doing and trying to understand how you can brace your business, good or bad. Because like I said, 3/4 of restaurant owners interviewed said they don't feel good about the economy, yet they're making decisions that lead to otherwise what they're feeling, if that makes sense. Like they're saying we're scared, but at the same time, their business decisions are proving to go against that. So taking emotion out of it, thinking clearly, whether or not you support tariffs, whether or not you support like how inflation's happening, or if you even want to believe it, the reality is in the numbers, it's in the data, it's in how it's like Olive Garden. They probably didn't want to have to lower, like them lowering portions probably sounds crazy, but they have to because that's what the data is doing. So it's like looking at this data is super important if you're going to win in this environment. So just my thought before we head out.
So if you're listening, check where you're listening right now, whether it's on a podcast player, whether you're on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, just like the video and subscribe so that you can continue to get episodes and clips like this, even if you're not going to watch the full episodes and there's maybe only one story per week that gets you excited, that will make sure that that gets delivered to your feed. Also, if you're on a podcast player, we're really aiming to try to up the number of reviews that we have. And so on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, we're trying to hit 100 reviews on each platform in isolation. And so check to see if you've left a review or not. Because I've had shows where I leave a review and then for whatever reason, it doesn't update. And so it's a quick tap. Give us 1 star, 5 star. I don't care. We want the feedback. And then that will also help us to make sure that this show gets out to more folks. Anything else, Ray, to close out?
I'll just say that, we're going to discuss it. I watched a few episodes of Next Gen Chef on Netflix. Really enjoyed it, partly because half of the chefs were chefs that I had at the CIA. But yeah, I actually think it's a really good job. And, it kind of next gen chef. It was kind of marketed like a little weird, and there are some like stuff, but I actually think it's one of the more grounded recipe competitions or cooking competitions that I've seen. I actually was really impressed with like the ideation process. I know you haven't seen it yet, but I was like, oh, this is actually interesting. I'm actually drawn into it. So, very interesting to see. So,
Cool. Well, we'll see everybody next week. Thanks as always for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.